The forest was still, save for the gentle hum of crickets and the distant whisper of wind weaving through the pines. Sergeant Lena Moore moved like a shadow through the underbrush, her senses sharp from years of field training. She had been dropped into the woodland for a week-long survival exercise, completely alone, just her, nature, and the gear in her pack. It was supposed to be routine, an exercise in endurance and resourcefulness. But tonight, everything felt wrong. The ground had trembled an hour ago, subtle but unmistakable. Birds scattered and a low, unnatural hum vibrated in the air, vanishing as quickly as it came. She hadn't imagined it. Her instincts had flared like a struck match. That's why she abandoned her makeshift camp and followed the disturbance deeper into the woods. Now, crouched behind a fallen log, Lena squinted through the trees. A faint glow pulsed through the mist ahead, rhythmic and cold, like the heartbeat of something not quite alive. She crept forward, the moss muffling her steps. The glow led her to a small clearing where a metallic disc, no larger than a manhole cover, lay embedded in the earth. Steam hissed around its edges. Suddenly, the center of the disc irised open with a slow, mechanical click. Lena's hand went to the pistol holster at her hip, though some part of her knew a weapon wouldn't help. What emerged wasn't what she expected. A small, obsidian figure rose cautiously from the hatch, no taller than a toddler. Its skin, if it could be called that, was smooth, gray-blue, and faintly iridescent. Its head was disproportionate to its slender body, with large, coal-black eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished glass. She didn't move. Neither did it. The creature looked up at her, not with hostility or fear, but confusion, curiosity. It blinked once, slowly, and tilted its head. Behind her, twig snapped. Lena spun around, weapon drawn. A young man stood just inside the clearing, his hands raised in a peaceable gesture. Flannel shirt, backpack slung over one shoulder, unshaven but alert. "Whoa, don't shoot," he said quickly. "I'm not with anyone." I heard it, too. She didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" "Eli Winters. I'm a freelance astrophysicist. I track atmospheric anomalies. This area lit up like a Christmas tree on my instruments about an hour ago." His eyes drifted past her. "And I'm guessing you found the source." Reluctantly, Lena lowered the weapon but didn't holster it. Eli stepped closer, keeping his movements deliberate. When he saw the creature fully, he stopped short, breath catching in his throat. "Jesus," he whispered. "It's real." The cub, because it was clearly young, its movements hesitant and juvenile, watched them both. Then it crouched lower, hands pressed to the edge of the hatch as though preparing to retreat. "No," Lena said softly, stepping forward. "It's okay." Her voice was low, soothing. She remembered using the same tone with frightened children in war zones. The cub hesitated, then stopped, visibly calming. "We can't stay here," she said to Eli, glancing around the clearing. "If it made a signal coming in, someone else will have picked it up. Military, intelligence, worse." He nodded. "I've got a cabin about a mile west of here. Off-grid. It's small, but we'll have cover. Can you carry it?" She hesitated. It looked light, but the idea of touching it made her skin crawl, until she looked again into those eyes. Not monstrous, just lost. She scooped it into her arms. The cub didn't resist. It let out a soft trill, like a coo muffled by static, and rested its head against her chest. They moved fast through the woods, Lena leading, Eli keeping watch behind. The cub was oddly warm and pulsed with an internal rhythm, like it carried its own source of life independent of its surroundings. They reached the cabin just before dawn. Hidden beneath thick canopy and camouflaged with age and neglect, it looked abandoned. Eli keyed open the heavy lock and ushered them inside. Inside, it was clean, modest. A single room with scattered research equipment, an unmade bed, and a battered table covered in notes. Lena set the cub gently on a blanket. "What do we do now?" Eli asked, watching it explore the room on unsteady legs. "We don't panic," Lena said, "and we don't tell anyone." Eli exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Do you understand what this is? This isn't just a lost pet from another planet. This is a seismic shift in our place in the universe." "Right now," Lena said firmly, It's a child, and it's alone. That stopped him. He looked again at the cub, who was staring into a mirror, pressing a hand against the glass as if testing for another world beyond it. They spent the day watching it, feeding it bits of fruit and crackers. It didn't eat much, but it tried. It mimicked gestures, sounds, even facial expressions, with eerie precision. When Lena smiled, it tried to do the same, the motion awkward but sincere. When Eli laughed softly at a clumsy stumble, the cub imitated the sound. That night, Lena sat near the window, rifle on her lap, eyes scanning the trees. "It's scared," she murmured. Eli was on the floor with the cub, sketching rough diagrams of its hatch and origin trajectory. "It's not the only one." "Do you think it was sent here?" she asked. "On purpose?" Eli frowned. "Maybe, but if so, why no retrieval team? No contact. Could be stranded. Or abandoned," he said quietly. Lena's expression hardened. She looked over at the cub, now curled up in the blanket, its breathing slow and steady. Not anymore. Outside, the forest creaked with the weight of secrets. But inside, a fragile trust was beginning to form. And though none of them could name it yet, the bond between soldier, scientist, and alien had begun to shift into something more human than any of them expected. The stars wheeled silently overhead, indifferent witnesses to what might have been the beginning of something extraordinary. The cabin became a world of its own, a fragile bubble of warmth tucked within the cold hush of towering trees. In the days following the cub's arrival, the forest outside seemed to stretch wider, its silence heavier, as if holding its breath. Inside, time reshaped itself, marked not by clocks but by the alien's progress. Each blink, each mimicry, each quiet attempt at understanding. Lena had never thought of herself as motherly. Her life had been forged in sand and steel, under command and protocol. Emotions were tools to be sharpened or sheathed. But now, they stirred in her with quiet intensity. The cub, whom they started calling Novi, short for novice, Latin for new, had become the gravitational center around which her instincts orbited, not just as a soldier or protector, but something more intimate, maternal. That realization struck her one morning as she watched Novi try to button a flannel shirt Eli had left folded on the floor. He was growing, or rather, adapting, rapidly. Novi figured out how to operate the solar lanterns, sort the colors in Lena's duffel, and trace simple shapes on Eli's tablet. He began responding to names, gestures, even emotions. When Lena stubbed her toe and let out a frustrated growl, Novi winced and made a low humming noise that sounded oddly like concern. He had no voice, not yet, but he communicated in movement, mimicry, and glimmers of empathy that pulsed like sonar. Eli documented everything. He filled notebooks with diagrams and theories, constantly pacing, talking to himself in fragments. Neurological plasticity beyond any terrestrial species, evolutionary leap, or designed this way. His fascination bordered on obsession, but Lena understood it. This was his life's work made flesh. Still, his awe couldn't quite mask the unease that had crept into the corners of their sanctuary. "Someone's going to come looking," Lena said one evening, her voice low over a cup of stale coffee. "Maybe not today, but soon." Eli didn't look up from his scribbles. "I've been jamming nearby satellite transmissions. Low tech. Crude, but it buys time." She studied his face. "You're scared." He hesitated. "I'm terrified, not of Novi, but of what he represents. If the wrong people find him." "They won't," Lena said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Outside, a crow let out a ragged caw and launched into the air. The sudden sound startled Novi, who had been drawing circles in the dust with a stick. He froze, eyes darting to Lena. "It's okay," she said gently. "Just a bird." He turned back to his drawing more slowly now, as if considering the concept of reassurance. Later that night, a memory stirred. Lena dreamed of her younger sister, who'd vanished in a refugee camp years ago, lost during an air raid. That same small hand, slipping out of hers in the smoke. She woke with her jaw clenched, heart hammering, and found Novi curled against her side, breathing in sync. The bond was no longer a theory. It was real, visceral, and irreversible. By the fourth day, Novi began imitating words, not speaking them, but shaping his mouth around the syllables he heard most often. Lena, Eli, safe. He pointed at the sky and tilted his head, confused, then made a low warble that neither of them recognized, but both felt deep in their bones. It wasn't language, not as humans knew it, but it meant something. Eli tried recording it. He's trying to tell us where he came from, or who he's missing. His family, Lena said, almost a whisper. Eli hesitated. Do you think he was left here on purpose? Lena didn't answer. Her gut said no. No parent, on Earth or elsewhere, would abandon something so fragile unless there was no other choice. But there were no signs of others. No ships, no transmissions. Just silence. And that silence was starting to draw attention. It began with distant sounds. Helicopter blades slicing the sky far off to the east. A sudden burst of static across Eli's equipment. Then the unmistakable hum of a drone overhead. Brief, fleeting, gone before it could be seen. But Lena heard it. She knew that sound. She packed a go bag the same night. Eli noticed. How long do we have? Days. Maybe less. What if it's just a coincidence? She gave him a look. You don't believe that. He ran a hand through his hair. No, I don't. They made contingency plans. If one of them got caught, the other would take Novi and vanish. If both were compromised, Novi had to escape into the forest. Lena was already mapping routes, hiding supplies. The weight of it pressed on her like body armor. She could never remove. The next day, Novi shared a memory. It began with a touch, his hand, light as wind, against Lena's wrist. Then a sudden rush behind her eyes. A feeling more than a vision. Heat rushing air, the sharp cry of machines. Panic, lights flashing. A hand, larger, familiar, pushing him into the pod. A voice she didn't understand but felt in her heart. Goodbye. Survive. She staggered back, breath caught in her throat. Eli helped her to a chair, eyes wide. What did you see? He didn't come here by choice, she said hoarsely. He was sent during something terrible. A war, or an escape. Eli went pale. That means someone's looking for him. Or worse, looking for whatever they were fleeing from. Novi stood in the center of the room, watching them, blinking slowly. His eyes shimmered with something that looked like sorrow, or maybe understanding. He was aware of their fear. Lena stood and crossed him. She knelt, touched his shoulder. You're safe, she whispered. We'll keep you safe. That night, Lena didn't sleep. Neither did Eli. The cabin no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage waiting to be discovered. But when morning broke, something shifted. Not outside. In here, between them. Novi began to hum again. Soft vibrations that resonated in the wooden walls. Eli checked the frequency. Subsonic, rhythmic. Repeated every 11 seconds. He's sending a signal, he said. But not like before. This is softer. Personal. Like he's reaching out. Not broadcasting. Searching. Lena didn't stop him. Whatever this was, it wasn't dangerous. It was instinct. A call. Like a heartbeat in the void. And for the first time in days, she let herself hope. If Novi could reach someone, his kind, his family, maybe they could return. Maybe this didn't have to end in hiding or loss. But the thought barely formed before she heard it again. The low, mechanical whir of something watching. A drone, closer this time. She locked eyes with Eli. It was no longer a matter of if. It was when, and how far they'd go to protect the child who had somehow become theirs. By the time the sun pierced the tree line the next morning, Lena had already scouted 3 alternate exit routes from the cabin. She moved like she had in combat zones, silent, calculating, every sense primed. But this wasn't war. This was something worse. In war, at least, you knew who the enemy was. Eli hadn't slept. He sat hunched over the table, scrolling through intercepted signals on his cracked tablet. Static, scrambled codes, distorted pings, but one stood out. A triangulated pulse, narrowing in on a location, repeating in 6-minute intervals. Someone was zeroing in, and they weren't broadcasting a request. "They'll be here by tomorrow," he said without looking up. "Les," Lena muttered, "if they're good." They had rehearsed this moment. Escape bags were packed. Novi's temporary clothing, now almost comically tight on his growing frame, was bundled with ration bars, a compass, and Eli's device loaded with encrypted data. But none of it felt real until they saw the first shadow move across the forest floor. Not a drone, not a search party. A man. Lena spotted him at midday. Black fatigues, gear too clean for a hiker, weapon slung low. Government, probably, not hers, not anyone she trusted. She returned to the cabin in a blur of muscle memory. "We're leaving," she said. "Now." Eli grabbed the gear. Novi, sensing the shift, rose without protest. His black eyes watched her, wide and unblinking. He knew. He always knew. They slipped into the forest, sticking to the denser shadows. Lena led, Eli in the middle, Novi close behind. For hours they moved through ravines and over roots slick with moss, stopping only when absolutely necessary. The woods became a maze of echoes, distant voices, the occasional crack of a branch that didn't belong to any of them. Whoever was coming, they weren't alone. Night fell cold and fast. They camped beneath the twisted canopy of pine, no fire, no light, just breath and darkness. Eli leaned against a boulder, his face drawn tight. "They're not just tracking signals," he said. "They're tracking him, his biology, maybe even his presence." Lena stared into the void beyond the trees. "Then we stay unpredictable. Keep moving. No patterns." Novi sat between them, quiet. He didn't hum or mimic tonight. He only watched. In the morning, the world narrowed. A net trap, crude but effective, snapped up from the ground as they passed a ravine. Eli barely managed to shove Novi clear before it snagged him by the arm. Lena fired on instinct, 2 silent shots into the shadows, and the line holding the net split with a whine of tension. Eli dropped hard, winded but alive. "Keep moving." Lena barked, dragging him up. Gunfire cracked through the trees. Not a warning shot. They ran. Branches lashed at their faces. Novi stumbled once, then regained his footing with almost unnatural grace. His speed had improved. His coordination, too. Lena noticed but said nothing. They reached the river just before noon. The water surged, white and violent over the rocks. "This is it," Lena said, eyes scanning the bank. "They'll expect us to keep inland. So we go through." Eli hesitated. "What if it's too cold for him?" "We carry him." He nodded and stripped down, packing his gear into a waterproof bag. Lena did the same. She tied Novi's makeshift coat tighter and hoisted him onto her back. He didn't resist. His tiny hands gripped her shoulders, strong and silent. The river cut through them like knives. The current tugged at their limbs, the cold numbing muscle, and thought alike. But they crossed. By the time they reached the opposite shore, Lena's legs were trembling. Still no time to rest. They climbed a steep embankment and found shelter beneath a low outcrop, just enough space for the 3 of them to collapse out of sight. Lena listened. No shouts, no pursuit, just wind and the high-pitched keening of unseen birds. They were safe for now. Eli wrapped a blanket around Novi and handed Lena a ration bar. "We can't keep running," he said after a while. "Even if we make it out of the state, there's nowhere safe. Not for him. Not long term." "You think I don't know that?" Her voice was low, rough. "I'm saying we might not be the only ones who heard his call." Lena looked up sharply. "You think someone else answered?" Eli pulled his tablet from his soak pack and powered it up. The screen flickered, dim but functional. He showed her the signal. It pulsed slowly, different from the distress beacon, smaller, cleaner, and organic in frequency. A response, maybe, or a reply from something not of Earth. "He stopped humming 2 days ago," Eli said. "Maybe he doesn't need any more." Lena watched Novi sleep, curled like a seed beneath the blanket. Her chest ached with something sharp and unfamiliar. "What happens if they come?" she asked. "Whoever they are?" Eli hesitated. "We let them take him. If they're his kind, his family, it's the right thing. And if they're not, Eli looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw fear that had nothing to do with the chase. Then we don't let them. That night, dreams came in flashes, bright corridors, screams in a language she didn't understand, a door slamming shut behind Novi's tiny form. Lena woke with tears in her eyes. When dawn broke, it came with light not from the sun, a shimmer in the sky, not loud, not fire, a glimmering arc, low and slow, trailing across the clouds like a falling star reversed. Eli saw it too. That's not a drone. Lena stood slowly, rifle in hand, breath catching in her throat. The light stopped above the clearing, and hung there. Not a ship, not exactly. It was more like a wound in the sky, a breach. Then, gently, something descended, a shape, pale and luminescent, not solid but present. Novi awoke. He stood and walked to the clearing, unafraid. Wait. Lena moved to stop him, but he turned to her and smiled. A small, perfect smile, his first real one. He touched her hand. Then Eli's, the presence in the sky, pulsed once. Novi turned back and walked forward, and the forest went still. No sounds, no danger, just silence, then light, and then nothing. Lena stood frozen. Eli dropped to his knees. The presence was gone, and so was Novi. Only the river kept moving, unbothered by the hole left behind. The forest breathed differently after Novi disappeared. Every breeze felt too quiet, every shadow too still. For Lena, the world had not merely shifted, it had hollowed. The space Novi left behind was not marked by sound or shape, but by the ache of sudden absence. She stood in the clearing long after the sky had healed itself, her fingers still tingling where he had touched her last. Eli didn't speak for hours. He sat beside a tree, staring at the spot where the light had been. The data on his tablet was gone, erased, overwritten, or perhaps absorbed by the encounter. Even the strange response signal had vanished without a trace. They didn't take him. Eli finally said, his voice thin. He chose to go. Lena didn't respond. She couldn't. The words lodged somewhere behind her ribs, where breath came short and memory stretched long. Novi had smiled at her, not with fear or confusion, but with trust, with peace. And then he had stepped into something beyond her comprehension. They waited 2 days in the forest, hidden and listening. No more drones, no more soldiers, not even the whisper of tracking boots. It was as if, with Novi gone, the hunt had ended. No one was interested in Lena or Eli, only the child who no longer walked this earth. When they returned to the cabin, it was ransacked. Not burned, not destroyed, just combed through. Whoever had come had done so with precision. Drawers pulled, files missing, the floorboards where Novi used to draw scraped clean. But they'd taken nothing sentimental. Lena's jacket still hung on its nail. Eli's books, torn and scattered, remained behind like the aftermath of a storm. Eli found the box of sketches Novi had made. Simple shapes, rough patterns, symbols drawn from memory. He gathered them slowly, wordlessly, and folded them into a single binder. We can't stay here, he said. Even if they're gone now, others will come. Curiosity always does. Lena nodded, but part of her didn't want to move. This cabin, battered as it was, had become something sacred. It was where she learned to feel again, where she had watched something alien become something beloved, and where she had, against all instinct, let herself become vulnerable. Still, she packed. They hiked west, keeping off the grid, keeping low. The cities were louder than she remembered. She and Eli took turns driving a salvage camper through side roads, fueling at forgotten stations, sleeping under tarp when they had to. The world had moved on, blissfully unaware of what passed between stars and soil. And then, something unexpected happened. In a diner off Route 92, surrounded by the static of a TV murmuring news, Eli stiffened mid-bite. Lena followed his gaze. The screen flickered through headlines, politics, weather, sports, and then paused, almost too casually, on a blurred frame from a surveillance camera. Grainy, black and white, a small figure, big eyes, thin limbs, walking through a cornfield in Iowa. They both froze. It can't be, Lena said, but the words had no weight. The footage was vague enough to be dismissed by most. The anchor laughed it off as a prank or edited hoax. Little green men strike again, he said. Chuckling, the image faded. But Lena knew that gait, that tilt of the head. Eli's hands trembled around his cup. He's alive. She wanted to believe it, wanted it so badly it hurt. They changed course. Every clue led them further, through small towns, rural outposts, whispered rumors. A boy who spoke to deer, a shape in the lake that shimmered, a light above an old silo. Most were nonsense. Some were not. Weeks passed. Seasons began to shift. The heat of summer thinned into the cool edge of early fall. And still they searched. Eventually, they stopped looking out of desperation and began following only the signs that felt real. Lena had learned to trust her gut again. It was the only compass that hadn't failed her. It led them to a reservation in the Southwest. A woman there, a tribal elder named Mara, greeted them without surprise. She spoke few words but watched with deep, knowing eyes. "You're looking for a child," she said, more a statement than a question. "Yes," Lena replied. "He's not from here." Mara studied her for a long moment. For a time, he left something behind. She led them to a grove beyond her house, where the rocks were arranged in a spiral, an ancient symbol repurposed. In the center was a single, smooth stone that pulsed faintly with warmth. Eli knelt beside it and touched it. He wept. Lena knelt too, not crying, but breathing deeply, grounding herself. Something in the air around the stone felt familiar, comforting, as if Novi had left a piece of himself here. A thank you, a goodbye, a promise. They stayed with Mara for a week, helped where they could, learned the stories. There were legends older than memory about visitors who were not conquerors or watchers, but kin, beings who came not to rule, but to connect, to remember what had been lost between stars. One night, Mara said to Lena, "Children come into our lives not always to stay, but to awaken us. He opened your heart, didn't he?" Lena nodded, unable to answer. When they left, Mara gave her the stone. "He may return," she said, "but even if he doesn't, you are changed, and that matters." They drove for a long time in silence. Eventually, they settled in a quiet town near the ocean, far from the paths of satellites and pursuit. Eli took a position at a private observatory, under an assumed name, studying deep space signals. Lena worked odd jobs, fishing, repairs, training locals in survival skills. Neither spoke often about Novi, but every so often, Lena would catch Eli staring up at the sky with a soft expression, or she'd find a sketchbook open to one of Novi's earliest drawings. Sometimes she dreamed of him, not as he was, but as he might become, taller, stronger, still smiling. One autumn evening, she stood on the porch, watching the sun melt into the sea. The wind carried the smell of salt and something else, faint, electric, like ozone. She closed her eyes and smiled. She didn't need answers. She had memory. She had hope. And somewhere, out there in the vastness of everything, she knew a piece of her still shone in the heart of a boy who had once fallen to earth and found his family not by blood, but by choice.